Thank you for tuning in to Shared Hope International's Invading the Darkness, an anti-sex trafficking podcast. We want to acknowledge that the content we discuss can be emotionally challenging and may evoke strong reactions. The stories we share often involve tough subjects related to suffering caused by sex trafficking, which may be difficult for some listeners to hear. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to Season 3 of Invading the Darkness, where we amplify survivor voices. I'm Yvonne, and today my co-host Kim shares her incredible journey from victimhood to overcomer. Her story highlights the unjust criminalization of sex trafficking survivors, who often face more stigma than support. After her powerful testimony, we'll discuss key takeaways and practical ways that you can help affect change. Throughout this episode, you will have chances to click on links below or visit our website, sharedhope.org/justlikeMe, to offer your voice in the fight to end unjust incarceration of domestic minor sex trafficking victims. Let's get started.
I chose to be an advocate because I had vulnerabilities and trauma that I experienced through exploitation of trafficking. And I knew that when I was recovered and I healed from all of my trauma, that my heart burned to go back in there and basically jump back in the fire and, be there as a support system to other girls and boys that were victims of trafficking. I remember what I needed coming out and the supports that I needed and how many resources weren't available at that time and how significant it was for, someone to hold my hand. And without that, it's really almost impossible to really regain that strength, that momentum to find your identity, and to discover who you are. So I knew I was passionate about it, to kind of be that person there for them. I also know how hard it is to really have a voice for yourself to follow through with prosecution towards your trafficker. And so I knew that that was something I was very fiercely burning inside to do, was to be their voice for them, to stand up and ensure that justice was served on their behalf. Yeah, so I can, think back various cases, right? But one in particular that stands out in my mind is she was, 15, 16 years old at the time, and she was trafficked, and she incurred a ton of criminal charges that required, multiple sentences that would have left her in prison for decades or longer. And because there's a gap in the court system with identifying victims of trafficking, it was very imperative that I showed up as an advocate on her behalf to the court system to explain to them exactly what a victim is, show them the red flags, bring the signs of awareness and education to their attention, and really kind of roll out the details and showing them, step by step why she didn't need to be prosecuted. Essentially, they were supposed to serve, if not life sentences. We're talking about mandatory 30 years or more. And these girls were able to, not go to prison and really have services and resources wrapped around them to support them to regain stability. And, that's all the difference right there, is when we can be an advocate and stand up for someone that is going to be charged, wrongly. That's everything. Without survivor leaders being in the court system to really educate judges and different professionals, then, there's no advocacy for the victims. There's no justice for them. And then they're sitting behind bars when they shouldn't be. When I was 11, I started to pick up criminal charges that would continue on into my teenage years. And unfortunately, due to various violations, I eventually landed in a level 10 maximum lockdown facility where my behaviors did not become any better because I was continuing to be violated and traumatized in there, and I would have outbursts. So therefore, unfortunately, due to the more charges that I caught, I was then sentenced to an adult facility in Gainesville. And although the justice system thought they were doing good by isolating me there, it created more compound, more complex trauma by the various things that I experienced and had to see while I was there. I was psychologically, mentally, verbally abused. I was sexually assaulted. There was times of, again, numerous hours of isolation where I absolutely had no one, and I just experienced more abuse. So, for us to think that we're doing them good by putting them in a, juvenile, justice system or a prison, that's not creating, that's not creating a better system for them. That's not creating, a better life for them. That's only criminalizing more, and then that creates more trauma. Yeah, and so there's still victims that I work with today that I see that they are, charged and they're placed inside these facilities. And unfortunately, that only creates more trauma than they had going in. They become institutionalized, they're isolated. The correct services are not in place. They don't have the right advocacy or support. And unfortunately, they come out and it's a cycle, because they come out worse than what they were when they went in. I see victims as young as 13 years old inside of a facility, a lockdown facility where it's secured, where they may only see the light of day 1 hour a day, and they're not getting the right therapeutic services in place. They're not healing, they're not resolving their trauma, and therefore, unfortunately, we see a 13-year-old that is completely destroyed before she ever even has a chance at life. So for a lot of male victims, a lot of people are not recognizing them as victims, right? Not even in regarding of their age or anything. Under the age of 18, they are a victim. And unfortunately, they're being criminalized and they're not being seen as the victim that they truly are. I have a case in particular that I've worked where I've also seen, he's a victim himself, but yet he was charged as a trafficker and thrown into lockdown facilities and was sent off to prisons as well. And unfortunately, that's not the case. He should have been offered services. He should have been offered the resources. He should have been treated as a victim and not criminalized because he also needs help. So we have to get to this place where we start understanding and realizing and identifying, the victim as a victim. So after I was released, I went into homelessness. I was couch surfing and I became pregnant with my first daughter. And unfortunately, it wasn't very long after I gave birth to her, I met my first trafficker at a gas station. And after 3 weeks of him grooming me, he then separated me from my daughter, making me leave her behind. And I would never have contact with her again until 6 years later. And so, I think the thing that is unfortunate is whether it's my situation or whether it's incarceration or whether it's the system in general, unfortunately, there's a gap there where we're not realizing the imperative relationship between a mother and a child. And the system creates more trauma by ripping the child away from the mother, and not allowing contact. There's several victims that I have worked with where they've been incarcerated and they've been pregnant and they get out and they immediately have a CPI case open and they rip the child away from the mother, and it's impossible for her to work that case plan to get her child back when she's fighting criminal charges and then trauma on top of being trafficked as well. So we have to really get to this place where, again, we really start aligning ourselves with how can we truly help that victim recover and gain sustainability and have the relationship between the child and themselves. In my situation, I was fighting manipulation and control by my trafficker. If I didn't meet my quota for the day or do what he told me to do, he would hang the phone call over my head. That was the most that I would get in 6 years. It was always false promises of, oh, if you do this and if you do that and you meet this quota this week, if I did the next thing he asked me to do, he would make promises that I was going to get to see her eventually. But one thing I can say is I never saw her in 6 years, but the phone call I always look forward to. Yes, it was controlled, but unfortunately, I knew that there was nothing I can do about it. That was the little bit that I was going to get out of him. And, those are the reasons why I would stay and do the things that he would say, because he would either threaten me that he would go back and kill her, or I wasn't going to get my phone call. And unfortunately, that meant a lot to me just to hear her voice. So a lot of times people always say, well, why don't you just leave? Why can't you just walk away? You're not physically bound. You don't have to be physically bound. It's a mental, bound. It's me being completely afraid of his tactics, what he's going to do that day. It's being, trauma bonded, Stockholm syndrome. When we talk about the things that he would do and would say, those are the reasons why we would never walk away, in the fear. What is he going to do next? Is he actually going to follow through? Because his truth mixed with lies would realistically have me thinking that he was going to follow through with what he said. So I think some things that could have been done differently in my situation is, I can tell you the countless times that I was in public, going through airports, going in and out of local public businesses in the public's eye, and no one ever stopped to notice that something was wrong with me, that I didn't make eye contact, that I didn't speak for myself, that I constantly looked at the ground, I didn't have my documentation. There was a time that I was arrested in Louisiana, literally for not having my documentation on me. It's illegal to be walking around without your ID. You don't just get a ticket like you do in some states. And so that right there could have been a recovery moment for me, that it wasn't. Instead, I was charged with 5 different charges, including resisting and all other kinds of stuff that I never even did. So they falsely incriminated me once again and threw me in jail. And they never even asked me why, and I didn't have my documentation on me.
Kim, you talk quite a bit about the unjust and criminalization of minors, both from your own personal experience and what you've observed as an advocate. Can you tell us more about how victims of trafficking end up in prison and why it's a problem?
Yeah, so a lot of times we end up in prison because we are criminalized for just, merely surviving, being victims ourselves. So we get caught up in a situation where we're defending ourselves, or whatever have it, when we make contact with law enforcement. And instead of being treated as a victim, which is a federal law, we're instead treated as a criminal. And so it's so important for us advocates to be able to stand in the gap and really raise our voices and hold the laws in place accountable, because it's a federal law. And so therefore we should be following and abiding by the federal law, and not criminalizing victims, and instead giving them the resources that they need to be able to reclaim their identity and rehabilitate in the community, and not being thrown into prison systems.
Yeah, I like how you pointed out how it's a federal law that protects domestic minor sex trafficking victims, but we still have 20 states that are criminalizing underage kids for charges related to trafficking. And so that's why we have contact your legislator. That's why we have, we want them to look in their prison systems, do an inventory, see who truly was a victim, and release them, let them have services. I know you and I have talked in the past about one of the biggest things is, well, jail is the best place for them and it helps them. There's no services that could really help them on the way out. And I'm here to tell you, I'm a service. Kim, you also said, hey, we're right here. Survivors that have made it this far, that have healed, that can help the next person, we're here. And so when they say that there's, what's going to help them, we are, you know.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. 100%. Like I said, prison systems are not going to help victims. It's not going to rehabilitate them. It is going to criminalize them. It's going to harm them more, because, trying to find housing. Yeah, trying to find housing and employment and, all the things that they will need to actually rehabilitate and live a successful life, it then cuts them off.
It's gonna follow them the rest of their life.
And they are no longer able to obtain proper housing and employment due to the criminal charges. So again, it's a lifelong journey of trying to reclaim their life, of simply being a victim. So criminalizing a child is completely wrong, and we need to follow the federal laws. And that's why us as advocates, we need to stand in the gap and raise our voices to ensure that justice is served in the right place.
Well, thank you for that, Kim. Kim's story is a heartbreaking yet urgent call to action. Unjust criminalization does not just punish survivors, it hinders their healing, perpetuates cycles of trauma, and keeps justice just out of reach. But you can be part of the solution. Help us stop the unjust incarceration of survivors by contacting your legislators today. It's simple. Text Shared Hope to 52886 or visit the link in the episode description to take action now.
Thank you for supporting survivors and advocating for change. Stay informed and keep fighting. Text Shared Hope to 52886. And until next week,